Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the podcast. With me today, I have Tom van der Lubbe, who is one of the co-founders of a company called Viisi, and also, so Tom's based in both Switzerland and also Holland. And you might not have heard of Viisi, and I'll leave it to Tom to kind of explain it all, but they're doing some cool stuff around how they organize themselves and how they manage themselves. And that's why I asked Tom to come on the podcast, because I wanted to give him a chance to tell his story about what they're doing about this more progressive kind of management and organizational sort of structure. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Adrian.
So, Tom, for the benefit of our listeners and kind of readers, can you tell us a little bit about you and a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah. So, Viisi is a mortgage advisor.
Mm-hmm.
So, we advise clients who want to buy an apartment or a house.
Mm-hmm.
And the model in the Netherlands is that the regulator has decided that the client has to pay for the advice. So, it's a fee-based model.
Mm-hmm.
We are not paid by the banks, but we're paid by the client.
Oh, right.
So that's the business we do.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess so. That gets the incentive kind of like in the right way, that you're acting for the client, because I know that in other countries, then mortgage advisors can be paid by the mortgage providers as well as charging a fee to the client. So it can almost feel like a mixed incentive model.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very wise decision of the Dutch regulator to do so. So we're very thankful they did so.
Yeah, but then the Dutch are pretty progressive when it comes to this sort of stuff, and also how you also kind of like how the Dutch have got I feel like a heritage in doing very progressive things, both in the economy but also how they run organizations, and that's sort of the thing that I wanted to talk to you about in terms of with Viisi and the approach that you've taken to your organizational structure and operating model. I mean, can you tell us about what you've done, and also what was the motivation behind all of this?
Very good question. We implemented holocracy, or it's called holocracy nowadays,
mm-hmm.
Which is a decentralized way of organizing the company. In a way, it's a kind of decentralized decision-making structure, mm-hmm. And the link to history or Dutch history is that the Netherlands has a history of decentralized decision-making. It's a Republican also history, but it's not only Dutch. You also see it in, let's say, trading nations or cities.
Mm.
Those cities were governed by the citizens. So it's on the one hand, if you see it from a historical perspective, it's the normal common thing, and then it went away for a long time, and now it's coming back in this whole agile movement, etc. But that's the way we're organized now. And
so let me dig into that a little bit. So because a lot of people talk about holocracy, or many people may have heard about holocracy or decentralized decision making and things. I mean, what does that mean in practice? I mean, can you give me an example of what that means in practice? Because it's like, are, because when people we'll talk about lean organizations, talk about agiles, and then this next thing is about self-managing, and then holocracy and things. And people, I'm sure there's a lot of people that just they nod their head sort of knowingly, but then have no idea kind of what that really means in practice. So can you kind of try and bring it to life for us a little bit?
Yeah. So let's say if you're from a client perspective, you would say that the one who is in charge for treating these clients well is empowered to take the decision, whatever it's necessary to make this client happy, to put it in a very, very simple way. And the more regulation or the more hierarchy levels you put in place, and the more indirect those decisions are made, the more complicated it gets to get client satisfaction on a high level.
Right. And because I know also that you've also going to turn around and you started from that sort of perspective of we have to be people first, then customers, then shareholders, because that's the right way to do it, rather than being the whole shareholders first, investors first. And so, is that driven by the holocracy approach, or is there a philosophical thing that you've chosen to do, and is it based on a set of values and beliefs? I mean, what's the thinking behind all that?
It's for us, it's the last. So it's about the ethic, beliefs, or fundament or purpose of the organization. So let's say when we founded the company, we said, okay, we want to decide for ourselves, and that's probably the biggest or most important incentive or reason for a lot of people to work independently. So and then if you are going to build a company, it's very strange that you end up telling a lot of people what they should do, because your incentive was exactly the other way around. So, and the ethical thing is that you want to treat others like you wanted to be treated yourself. So it's much nicer that if you go to work, that you can decide for yourself how you do the work. I mean, you have a clear understanding of the common purpose, but how you do the work and what you decide by, for instance, treating your customers well, that should be, let's say, much more in the circle of influence of the people who do the work.
Right.
So it also has to do a little bit with craftsmanship. So if somebody is valued for its craftsmanship or his or her craftsmanship, then you should leave also the decisions to create great results to those people.
Right. So like trust the people that have got a high level of craft, rather than actually almost treat them with respect in many ways, and trust in their judgment. If they've done the work and the training and they've had the experience, then why not?
That's right. I mean, what I always find very funny is that a lot of people, let's take the financial industry for instance, they are in management positions, and when I ask them, did they ever advise a client in their lives, they have never advised any client in their lives, because they started in, let's say, certain departments, strategy or finance or whatsoever, or marketing, doesn't matter what, but they have never seen a client or never advised a client.
Yeah.
And we all were financial planners.
Right.
We advise clients, and still 3 of the 4 founders advise clients.
Yeah, no, I do similarly like you. Find it really quite strange when you kind of speak to people, particularly senior execs, and I ask them, so when was the last time that you spoke to a customer, or hung out with a customer, or picked up the phone to answer a customer's call, or so on and so forth, and the sort of the number of people that kind of almost turn around and say, no, I don't really have time to do that sort of thing, or I haven't done that for a while, or that's kind of really the responsibility of my team, and it frustrates me and amazes me in equal measure, and that sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen the show kind of Undercover Boss. Have you ever seen that one?
No.
Okay, so Undercover Boss, you should look it up, because it's one of those ones. It started in America and Canada, but we've also had a few series of it in the UK, although it's not going on currently, I don't think. But what's interesting about that show is you get senior executives in a number of different companies that go undercover in their own company. And some of the revelations, that come out in terms of, one, seeing some of the stuff that has, head office was responsible for, like bad systems and old technology and stuff, and then also finding bad practices, but also absolute heroes on the, people doing a fantastic job. It's like, and all of this is a complete revelation to them, and I just think it's just like, wow. It's crazy, but anyway.
That's why we put our people first, because what you want to happen is that those people find solutions for themselves, where then, let's say, everybody in the company can be proud of.
Well, it's like it's almost a bit like it's also kind of that whole thing is like more brains are better than one brain.
Yeah, sure. It's collective intelligence is much higher than the individual intelligence. So and the one who is nearest to the customer probably has more knowledge what could be the right solution than somebody who's where the distance is much higher.
Almost inevitably, I would suggest. But so you talk about people first, and then customers, and then shareholders. That's fine. So. The thing I want to then ask you about, because actually you've probably seen some of the news and some of the announcements, and also just a broader trend around the recent rise of, rather than shareholder capitalism, but stakeholder capitalism. Yeah. What do you think is driving kind of that? Is that just like, do you think that's just like a bit of a fancy trend because companies have to look like they have they're being more responsive and are being a bit more caring, or is there something really fundamental kind of going on here?
There is something fundamental going on, but the reason why it's a fundamental change is that we're just getting back to the normal situation. So let's say the shareholder value capitalism. Mm-hmm. Shareholder value capitalism is something which started, let's say, in the 70s. Mm-hmm. With Milton Friedman, and then it was seen as normal to care for your shareholders and not for the rest. Mm-hmm. To put it a little bit bluntly, but that doesn't that's not a normal situation. So it for me as a historian, if you just take a much longer view on what happened in the past, it always has been multi-stakeholder. You can't just take let's say look on only one stakeholder. Sure. So for me, it's very strange. It took so long. So I think this is the normal situation. But let's say I would say in general, for instance, small and medium-sized enterprises, they always had a multi-stakeholder model. So for instance, if you have to work with your own people on a long term, you will always treat them well. Yeah. Just the whole hire and fire culture never has been normal in small, medium-sized enterprises. Yeah,
and particularly those that are also family-run enterprises as well.
They always also cared about their environment. They paid taxes. They cared about local initiatives. They built houses. They supported the church whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Or the local football club, etc. That is the normal, and the normal is not to take, let's say, not to feel responsible for your environment.
Yes, so it's the normal is to think and act longer term rather than actually to be driven by quarterly returns and total shareholder return, etc., etc. If you look at it. From a historical perspective, but it's always funny that we forget the lessons of history continually over and over again, and we tell ourselves we're smart, but hey ho.
Yeah, or something is totally new and innovative or innovative.
Yeah, and usually it's not that new and innovative if you actually have a broad enough perspective. But if I may, what I wanted to do is I wanted to ask you about a couple of things in particular that you've told me that you employ in the way that you work, because they're quite new, and I wanted to just explore that a little bit with you. I mean, first of all, you've embraced radical transparency in your business. Now, that's another thing that people have talked about, transparency. and particularly radical transparency. I mean, around new organisations, more progressive ways of working. I mean, what does that mean for you, and how does it work, and what effect has it had on the organisation? I mean, is that just like nothing's secret?
Yeah, let's say nothing is secret, or there must be a very good reason for it to keep it secret. So client data are not online, but for instance, our organizational structure and all the other stuff is online. So if you want to build trust, then transparency is a very good tool. And let's say also, again, with a historical background, we trust our states or our governance much more when information is publicly accessible.
Right.
So this, if you Google, for instance, radical transparency, which I find very funny, is that we think it comes from IT nowadays.
Right.
But there is this old called Westminster system, and it's English history, where they just wrote down what was discussed in Parliament.
Yes.
And somebody said, okay, I think the public has a right to know what is discussed in Parliament. So let's say in our public environment, we find it totally normal that it is trust building if you know what discussion is going on. You can just go into the House of Parliament or and then just follow the debates.
Sure.
But if you would like to join the debate which is going on in the boardroom, etc., of a corporation, it's not, because it's secret. Although on the other hand, you know that the intelligence in your organization probably is around somewhere, so it makes more sense to open the system so people can just bring their ideas and say, okay, did you think about this, or did you think about that, or we heard this, or we heard that. So again, you have something which is not new at all.
And so that is fascinating. I mean, did you, when you started Viisi, is that the way that you started off, or did you move to that way of working? And also, so did you start that way, and it's always been that way, or have you moved to that?
No, it's a process. So we let's say we already had this idea of what I explained before, that we were co-founders and we want to work for ourselves.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we treat our people then differently?
Sure.
That was the starting point, and then the problem we had is that this whole decentralized way of working is something which exists since a long time. There were also organizations in the past who used this. Then what I found out is that holocracy made it in a more practical form, also with software development going on, which just helps to implement this kind of stuff. And then we just started to implement and just to test a lot of stuff.
Right.
And then if you just continue testing a lot of stuff, then you find out certain things work and others don't. And then it's a continuous it's a process of finding out. And it's also something which becomes embedded in your culture, because you also attract people who want to work like that.
Right.
And people who, let's say, for instance, like hierarchy in the old-fashioned way, and a different business card every year, those people will leave your company.
And so that you were okay with the idea that people will transition out and other people transition into the business, and that's just part of the process.
Yeah, for instance, we just did a very practical example. When we started to implement this holocracy and those roles, which those roles are just an addition of let's say parts which are functions. We said from the beginning, let's put it in our email signature. And then there was this first question, how does it look like? And everybody knows what I do in this company, etc. And then afterwards, after a couple of months, everybody became really proud of it because they said, okay, everybody can just see what I'm doing. So and it's kind of a self-reinforcing system which attracts people who like it. But we also, for instance, what was one of our lessons learned was that all the people who work in our company as advisors, they never worked for a bank or another financial institution. It's very funny. So it's all people who, let's say, come from university or have worked in a big corporate for 1 or 2 years. Yeah. And then they start, and they're all let's say educated internally. So
Right.
nobody who starts as a mortgage advisor has done this job before.
Right.
And then it takes a year, and then they are able to advise, and they start with, let's say, simple first time home buyers. But this is also something which reinforces your culture. But we had 2 advisors who came from other banks, and they left the company. So
Yeah, so I think what's fascinating then, because what you're sort of implying there is that people get, if you come from a very established kind of way of working and you've been in a organisation for for a long time, then you end up getting, for want of a better word, sort of like indoctrinated into that way of thinking and that way of doing and being, and therefore, in order to transition into a bit more of a self-organised, transparent way of working, you'd have to unlearn a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
And people that are a bit newer on their journey or have had different experience don't have to go through that process because they're much more open to it because it's all very new to them.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also funny. We had, for instance, once a student who worked for us, and he said, "I like the company a lot, but I just like to get a new business card every 2 years."
Right.
And we just abolished this whole stuff. So there's only one title, and it's called visionary person.
Yeah.
Because we're called Viisi, and that's it. But we don't have any function titles. I find it very healthy, also very efficient. But I mean, it's just something you have to like. And I think, let's say, that most people like, especially young people, like it this way. And are not so keen on this old-fashioned hierarchy way of thinking. They look more for the substance, what I'm really doing, or what's the freedom I have in my job.
Yeah.
Can I decide how I do my work? How I do my work? That's something which they find important.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's kind of the short thing is like this type of self-organization and the sort of a non-hierarchical way of working that isn't about job titles. It's just about doing the work and done in a more of an egalitarian sort of way. That you're respected for your work rather than for your title, as it were. Is I guess the short answer is it's for some people and not for others. It could be for everybody, but it's just other people's kind of expectations and assumptions and perceptions and things that sort of get in the way of them kind of like working in that sort of way.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. But so the other thing that I thought, which was interesting, because actually working in this sort of way, I would have expected. So there's 2 things I wanted to ask you about. One is that you've only got one rule that sort of guides you and kind of what you do. So so the first thing I wanted to do was ask you about that. But the second thing I also wanted to build into that was, is there a when you're adopting a more self-organized approach, does that therefore also imply that there's more, because it's less command and control and hierarchical, does that imply that there's actually more discussion and kind of like having to rummage around different sort of like things to get to a point where do you operate in a more of a consensus driven kind of like way, and so therefore it can feel like there's a more meetings and discussions and so on and so forth, rather than maybe a more command and control type of system, which would be like a set of instructions and just tasks get done, as it were, if you understand what I mean. Yeah,
I understand what you mean. I'll just split them in 2.
Okay.
So the one thing is the golden rule, and what you just see, if you just take a normal organization, you have a lot of, let's say, rules, and they are somewhere, and nobody can tell you what they are, because there are most of the time more than 3. And we just said it's in a way it's very simple, because this golden rule is something we didn't invent ourselves. It's something which you see in every religion. You also see it in philosophy. Just treat other people like you want to be treated yourself.
Yeah.
And that's something which, because it's so simple and so nice, you can use it. You can use it in every relationship. It can be towards clients, but it also can be towards partners, or even the environment. So that makes sense. And we just added, if you just don't know the answer, ask your colleagues.
Yeah.
Or just use common sense, and then you end up by, let's say, your question is it more, let's say, what is the kind of consensus culture? No, it's not, because the system, which is also in place in holocracy, but it's not from holocracy, or not invented by holocracy. It comes from sociocracy, or it comes from, even if you go further, let's say back in history, it comes from the Quakers, the English Quakers.
Yeah.
It's the consent principle. So you, on the one hand, you try to involve everybody, but the consensus principle has the problem that it becomes very slow, and there's no decision making going on at all.
Yes.
And the consent principle is totally different. So some people have to buy in, and if they have a very good reason to let's say, to say, did you think about this, or did you think about that, then this kind of feedback is integrated into the decision making process, and that makes it very, very, very strong. So everybody who wants to know a little bit more about it, I would just recommend to Google on consent principle, because this is really something which is, to my point of view, extremely powerful tool for decision making in general.
Okay.
And just it's because on the one hand it speeds up, but on the other hand, the one who has feedback or something against it is integrated in the decision making process itself, and that makes it so powerful.
Right. And does that make is it therefore, does it take, well, excuse me, put my figure out what I want to say, is that, does that mean it can take a bit longer to make kind of decisions, or not?
No, it even goes much faster.
Right.
Because the whole decision-making process is split in 3 different parts, and that's very comparable, let's say, with the legislation process.
Yeah.
So the first is you have to ask questions to understand the proposal, and it's totally split from the critical discussion.
Right.
And then the third part is that you have to agree on it. So you say, yes, agree. But if you don't agree, then you should have a real good argument for not agreeing, and then this let's say opposition is integrated, and it's a little bit like legislation.
Right. Yeah. So
it's also always the question: how do we integrate this in this proposal to get, let's say, in Parliament it would be a majority, but here everybody has to agree. So which is also very, very productive, is that once you have decided on something, you don't have a discussion going on, I was against.
Right.
Because everybody bought into this decision.
Okay. So the other thing that's fascinating. I'm sorry, that's fascinating. I'm just sort of thinking as you're talking about that. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about and ask you about is that you also, in many ways, is almost like, I'm thinking, it feels like you're adding kind of increasing complexity to something which is supposed to try and reduce complexity, but you've adopted a rotating leadership model that's apparently inspired by how the Swiss government manages itself. I mean, first of all, is that right? And if so, how does it work? And kind of tell us a little bit about what the Swiss government does, and then kind of how you work within Viisi in terms of this rotating leadership.
Yeah. It's let's say it's still in practice in the Swiss governmental system, but it was not invented there. So it originally comes from the Greek polis, the city-state.
Okay.
And it's called in Latin it would called be primus inter pares, first among equals, and it's one of the oldest principles you have. And you also see it, for instance, in small army units. So was also in the Roman Empire. So the one who is in charge is chosen by the group, right? And then you have a kind of rotation system, which has a very healthy effect, because everybody knows that on a certain time it will be their turn. So it's always very easy to criticize somebody else, for fulfilling a role. But if you know that, let's say, the next half year is your turn, then you decide a little bit more on what's really substantial and what is kind of more politics, or I don't like it, etc.
Right.
But that's a very, very, very old principle. But it's still in practice in the Swiss government, where you don't have a prime minister. Yeah, you have one, but you have, I think, 6 or 7, and every year somebody else is in charge of the government. And the funny thing is that, let's say, the governments who are most successful, or the countries who are most successful, if you would take the UN goals as a starting point, these are all countries which have a very decentralized structure. So it's very much based on institutions, and not very strongly based on strong leadership. So the question I always ask is, do you know any chancellor or minister from a Scandinavian country? Nobody ever can mention anybody.
Yeah.
But if you just see, for instance, about, it doesn't matter what it is, if it's about wealth or life expectancy or social mobility or criminal offenses, it doesn't matter what it is always the same countries, always the 4 Scandinavian countries. Then sometimes Switzerland plays a dominant role, but always decentralized governments. And
so it's, I guess that's, you're kind of basically what you're saying is that, and it's similar to in sort of organizations, is the most, I guess you're suggesting that the most sustainable organizations are the most high and most sustainably performing organizations are the ones that are not necessarily driven by one kind of personality in a way. So it's actually
right.
it's about what you're about and how you can all do it together, rather than being a cult of a founder or a CEO.
Yeah, and the stronger, let's say, the institutional framework and the values are, the easier it is to keep up this kind of level. But it's something which we also know from state. So if you have a parliamentary history which is very strong, then, and also checks and balances, just take what's going on in the UK at the moment.
No, please don't.
Then, but let's say there's no discussion if, let's say, courts can intervene.
Yes.
It's typical something which, let's say, you call trias politica and Montesquieu, but it's something which I always mention. If you talk about companies, if you just see how long they survive, the more successful a CEO is, the more somebody thinks in the end that he's always right.
Yes.
It's mostly a he.
Yes.
So, but in the end, we know from, it doesn't matter what it is. If you also take biology, but you can also take power plants, that if you have a more decentralized network structure, it's much more stable. Internet is also an example.
Yes.
Than if you would have one big server. Because if this server doesn't work or this power plant doesn't work, the whole city doesn't have electricity anymore. So let's say this kind of seeing that decentralized network structures are stabilize or have a stabilizing effect is something which we understand in the internet. We understand it for power plants, etc. But for organizations, it's more or less the same.
Yeah.
Because if we would say we have this brilliant leader, if this leader is not there anymore, what happens to the company? And then you know why companies don't survive more than 100 years. I mean, the life expectancy of companies is going down all the time.
Sure. And do you think that's because we're actually, even though there's this a bigger move towards like stakeholder capitalism, that actually the world of business is still dominated by the cult of the CEO or the cult of the founder, the cult of the entrepreneur?
Yeah, and it's also something, for instance, if you see that if companies want to merge, we know from statistics that 80% will be not successful.
Sure.
So why do those companies merge all the time?
Yeah, no, indeed. So, Tom, my blog and all these interviews focus largely on service and experience and engagement, and some of the interviews I do are somewhat kind of tangential to that. But that's the thing that I'm primarily interested kind of in is, and then both kind of, customer outcomes and also employee outcomes. So how has all this affected your business and Viisi, as it were, in terms of the customer and employee outcomes that it's kind of generated?
Yeah, that's very good question, because that's in the end always the question. If you're so smart, can you please prove?
Yes.
It's for instance, if you just see a customer, let's say experience, or let's say the Trustpilot is just on our website, and we probably have the highest mark, I think 9.8 on a scale of 10.
Right.
So it's very funny that, because they always say, yeah, you put your own people first, but not the client, and what does it mean for your clients? The funny thing is that our outcome is much better, but that's something, let's say, we talked about the last half an hour.
Yeah.
But you can also see that it's a company as a whole becomes much stronger, and there's much more innovation going on. Because let's say if you solve a problem, then and somebody is empowered to do so, somebody will also bring these ideas into practice, because if somebody thinks that somebody can do so, then it is implemented. But if you say no, the thinking is done by the marketing or the strategy department, you just have to do the work. This Tayloristic principle. Then it's in a way just to say to people, you don't have to think. You just have to operate, and that's something which, in the end, to my point of view or to our point of view, doesn't work. And that's why people want to bring this whole agility back. But I think it should be more. We think it should be more human approach, because everybody wants to be treated like this. So the funny thing is that, for instance, it's on our website that clients come second. Yeah. And the funny thing is that the clients, they come to us and say, "Oh, I would have loved that this would be the case in the company where I work myself." So
people get it, I guess.
I think that really helps. But for instance, also, the first, I think we exist 8 or 9 years now, but the first 7 years we only grew by just by recommendations, or the people who work for us. Half of the people who come to us, they know people who work for us. So it's much more internally, let's say, grown than we depend on external stuff. So I think that's the best way to describe that this system works. But I think that the general small and medium enterprises, they all work like this. Perhaps you have different flavors, but in the end, it works like this. And also, for instance, HR will be the topic of the family owner or the CEO of a small or medium sized enterprise. He won't say no, I don't care about the people. HR is something which is not a board topic. No. Yeah. This is the family who owns the company, and they will talk to everybody who will start in this company.
Absolutely. So, Tom, if somebody was thinking about, they want to make their business or their team or their department a little bit more, or their whole kind of organization a bit more, I guess, a bit more progressive, a bit more adaptable, a bit more inclusive. That's something that is, it's built on how they manage things, is built on trust and respect and and value and things. I mean, given that you've gone down this kind of journey, I mean, where should people start? What should they be start thinking? Where should their thinking start? Or where should their actions start?
I think, to be quite honest, just to put your own people first and just ask them, because they will know, they will have all the answers.
Right.
The question will only be, are you willing to implement, or are you willing to give them the power to decide?
Right.
And these things can be very simple. So a lot of companies will just put, let's say, postcards or a certain budget for let's say presents for clients, and just say, okay, when something happens, and something has to be repaired, you can just do so. And if you can write a postcard or send some flowers, etc., then that's something which let's say people who work in a company will just value and like a lot, because there always will be mistakes.
Right.
But the question is, are you able to repair it, and are the people do they have the power to repair it? And if what we know from client satisfaction is that the satisfaction is higher afterwards. So after a mistake is made, if you really care about the client will say, oh, that's really great. They did a great job, but a mistake can always happen.
Yeah.
So I think that could be a very good starting point, and will be a big relief for people, for instance, in the call center, etc., or the people on the floor who have to deal with it because something goes wrong, and then they are not able to act on that.
Yeah, you know the that thing that you just talked about, where client satisfaction is higher if there's been a problem and then you've solved the problem really, really well. That's known as the service recovery paradox.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating thing.
Funny.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's an interesting thing. So, Tom, just kind of into sort of wrapping up, is there anything else that you'd like to add? I mean, I know we've had a bit of a rummage around some of this sort of stuff, and I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explore some of your experience and how you've learned from history and things that you've implemented in to make it kind of a bit more real for people, but also to encourage people to go off and do their own sort of research and thinking. But is there anything else that you'd like to add that we've missed out before I ask you a couple of my kind of final questions?
Yeah, what I liked about, let's say, your whole approach of punk and music, etc., is that I have got the impression that, let's say, for the last decades there were too many Excel champions, let's say, governing companies.
Right.
And let's say, for instance, I as a historian take a lot of historical examples, but if you just see, let's say, beauty was not created by people who studied economics. So yeah. Beauty was created by artists, by painters, by choreographers. If I think about ballet or something like that, or music, etc. So the beauty has to be, let's say, redeveloped or just you have to think a little bit more about it. Or if you just think about, let's say, the fashion tradition in London or this kind of stuff, people come with certain ideas, and then in the beginning it's seen as something which is very exotic, but you really have to rethink stuff, and there's a lot of discussion going on Elon Musk, etc., or electric cars, etc., but that's something which happens in art all the time.
Yeah.
You can't be a famous artist if you paint the same all of people painted before you were there.
Yeah.
It always starts with doing something which has never been done before. So I think art, or especially non-business topics, should be taken much more seriously.
Perfect.
And that's also something which I liked about your whole punk way of thinking.
Thank you so much. But I mean, that which is a brilliant segue, because I've got a couple of one of the things I've been doing on these interviews is, as a piece of like ongoing sort of social research, is been asking people that I've been talking to 2 questions. And the first question that I've been asking them is like, what 1 or 2 words do they think would describe a punk approach to, say, customer experience or business more broadly?
Yeah, that's what I really would say is think as an artist. So really try to think it in a totally different way. And it's big artists did something. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's music or fashion, they always came with something. Even if you think about the catwalk, for instance, you can never wear this stuff.
Yeah, no, sure.
Which let's say in business would say, but you can't wear this stuff. No, but that's where the inspiration comes from.
Yes, that's great. I love it. Think like an artist. And then the final question, Tom, is that given what you said, what company or brand do you think epitomizes that type of think like an artist or punk CX kind of ethos?
Yeah, what I liked, or at the moment like a lot is for instance a company like Patagonia,
Right.
because they made quite some changes also in the past, which more or less could have, let's say, they risked their company, but they were very, let's say, serious about their purpose.
Yes.
Or I mean, now the company has become much bigger, but then just to think about what kind of stuff do you produce, etc., and really think that is the right step to do so. They risk something.
Yes.
But that's something. If you think about artists again, they really have to. David Bowie, for instance, I find brilliant. Is somebody who reinvented himself all the time. So if you take pictures from different periods of time, it's a totally different artist.
Yes.
And that's something where I have the impression that companies find it very difficult to reinvent themselves, which means in the end, if they don't, they are dead. So
Yes.
they have to perhaps it would be making more sense to read a biography about David Bowie than to read the next business book about strategy, for instance.
Yeah.
Where you're not inspired because it's too common sense or too simple.
Yeah.
So and then we're back at punk, because everybody likes the word punk, and then you have to start to explain about music.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, thank you for that. That's great. And just want to say thank you. First of all, congratulations on the journey that you're on and the success that you've had with Viisi. I think it's super interesting. It's very inspiring. I love that the way that you fold in lessons from history into that. So that's been great. And finally, just thank you for sharing your time with us today and sharing your experience with us today. That's been brilliant.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Wow, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as we say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.